This is the Almost Timely newsletter for the week of May 7th, 2023. Content authenticity statement: 97% of this newsletter was written by me, the human. There are 2 screenshots of AI-generated content. What's on my mind this week? The next wave of generative AI. This week, let's talk about what's happening right now in generative AI, because it's been a big week. Well, it's been a big few weeks. So let's go over what happened and what these developments mean. As you know, last fall, OpenAI released its language model interface, ChatGPT, that opened the door for non-technical users to be productive with large language models. The model, and remember in the context of AI, a model is just a fancy word for software, the model behind ChatGPT is a massive behemoth known originally as InstructGPT. These models are large, very large. They're very expensive to train and costly to operate. For years, other developers and companies have tried making their own, but the cost of starting from scratch, assembling the massive quantities of data needed to train these models, meaning build them, and deploying it are usually well out of reach of scrappy entrepreneurs and even well-funded companies. There have been many attempts and starts over the years, but none have been able to perform as well as the big money models that big tech companies created. Thus, for many companies and many people like you and me, ChatGPT and services like it have been the only serious game in town. Until about a month ago. Facebook, or Meta, I guess, released their own model, LLaMa, which stands for Large Language Model from Meta or something along those lines. But they did it in a different way than the other tech companies, right? Rather than give away an interface like Bing or Bard or ChatGPT, they released the underlying model itself, LLaMa, as a non-commercial open source software package. LLaMa is the same high quality as the other big tech models, but it's available to many more people for free. This is a big deal because Facebook basically took this gigantic model trained on 1 trillion words and just gave it away. That's the first pebble in the avalanche. In AI, there's a concept called fine-tuning, where you take an existing model and tailor it to your needs. Remember, these large language models, they don't contain words. They don't contain actual words. They contain mathematical probabilities about words, like a giant library of statistics about what words are near other words, what phrases are near other phrases, etc. A big, public, general model like the ones from OpenAI are gargantuan because they have to be a jack of all trades. Kind of like the family dog, right? Family dog's part companion, part retriever, part guard dog, and not necessarily overly specialized at any one thing, except sleeping. When we want a language model to do one thing very specifically, we change the probabilities in its library of statistics to overly favor that one thing over anything else. It's called fine-tuning. It's like training a dog to specifically be a bomb-sniffing dog. That dog's not going to be good at sniffing out drugs or illicit substances or earthquake survivors, and probably won't be, very well suited for other general dog tasks like, being the family pet until it's retired from that's very specific duty. Fine-tuning a model isn't nearly as costly as building the model in the first place. If entrepreneurs and engineers wanted a custom model for a specific task, it's far easier to fine-tune an existing model as long as the source quality model is high enough quality, right? And that's what LLaMa is, a very high quality starting point for a lot of innovation that Facebook has released to the world. Think of LLaMa like this. Let's pretend that generative AI is like pizza, right? Up until now, you had to order pizza delivery from OpenAI, right? Through ChatGPT and their APIs. They were the only game in town, and you have to get the pizza that they make the way they make it. You might have thought about, gosh, wouldn't it be nice to make your own pizza from scratch? But for a variety of reasons, time, money, talent, you just didn't. Now, along comes Facebook and LLaMa. And LLaMa's like one of those pre-baked pizza kits you buy at the grocery store, right? The pizza's mostly made. Now, all you have to do is customize this very nicely pre-made pizza with the toppings that you want. But you don't have to go through all the work of making the pizza from scratch. That's what LLaMa is. That's why it's so important. In the several weeks since LLaMa came out, we have seen a massive explosion of new derived models that are very high performance but scaled to run on hardware as small as like a hobbyist Raspberry Pi, those little tiny computers. The tuning capabilities of LLaMa are robust. We see models tuned specifically for tasks like research, healthcare advice, finance, and more. That's what an open source model enables. Massive variation, massive diversity in the space. It's generally speaking a very good thing. There are even projects to put these models on your laptop as private chat instances like GPT for all. This looks and runs like ChatGPT, but it's a desktop app that doesn't need an internet connection once it's set up, and critically, does not share data outside your individual computer. That's ensuring your privacy, right? Up until now, services like ChatGPT have sent your data to a third-party company for their use, which is why we've said you should never, ever, ever use them with sensitive information. Now, that's no longer the case. You can use GPT for all in complete privacy. It's the best of both worlds. The performance and capabilities of a service like ChatGPT with the ironclad privacy, because the data, your data that you put in as prompts, never leaves your computer. That makes it ideal for industries like finance, healthcare, government, any place where you wouldn't want to just hand over protected information willy-nilly. This has made a big splash in the tech community. A post by a Google employee has made some waves recently by declaring that neither Google nor OpenAI are paying enough attention to open source, and the open source movement is racing past all the big tech players with their closed models. I agree with this assessment. Open source is a powerful movement that it democratizes technology and makes it accessible to almost anyone. There's a reason why Linux, the open source operating system, powers the majority of public internet service. It's better, it's faster, it's more secure when you operate it correctly, and it's near zero cost. That same thing is now happening in AI. So why did Facebook do this? I guess Meta. Why did Meta do this? Why did they give away such a valuable piece of intellectual property? Because they're behind. Meta is behind. Their most recent efforts in AI have not gone well. There's been some very public missteps, let's call them that. So rather than try and do it themselves, they've simply done the hard grind of assembling the model, and then they tossed it to the community, to the world, to do with as we please. And already, coders and developers have taken their excellent base model and made insane improvements in a very short time. There are advancements that take Facebook's base model and tune it for chat, tune it to be multiples of times faster, tune it to run on nearly any device. The community, in other words, did all of Facebook's R&D for free, and now they can take that stuff back and use it and not have to have spent the time and the money to do it. So that's what's happening. Let's talk about what this means for marketing and for society overall. First, let's dig into the marketing side. Previously, to deploy a large language model in a marketing context, like a chatbot on your website, you pretty much had to pay the OpenAI tax, right, and use their APIs if you wanted high-quality output. With the release of LLaMa and the crazy number of free open source models, including some derivatives that are now licensed for commercial use, that's no longer the case. Now, if you have the technical team in place, you can use an open source model and save yourself a big bucket of money. Anyone who's marketing software, you work in a software company, building a large language model into your software just got a whole lot easier, a whole lot more privacy compliant, and a whole lot more free. Right? Instead of having to wrestle with commercial licensing and privacy controls, you can now just stuff an open source model into your software and run it locally within the software package for no privacy issues. Right? That's a big deal, particularly if your software is going to run in places like the EU. The fees that OpenAI collects for its API, those just went to zero for these software companies. That's a big win for software companies, especially scrappy startups, and for us consumers who like to use these products because it's free now, effectively. Companies can integrate large language models into many, many more products that they might have looked at the past and said, nah, we can't afford to be paying those fees to OpenAI. Now they're like, let's put a language model in to make our software easier to use. For marketers who are just getting used to ChatGPT, this is also a boon. This is also a great benefit. You can have a model that runs on your desktop or your laptop computer and has 95% of the performance of ChatGPT with none of the privacy issues. And it has a stable underlying model that your company can control. When you install GPT for all, you install it, the software, and a model. And then you get to decide when you want to change that. Right? If you've ever used ChatGPT after they upgrade the underlying model, you've probably noticed that once reliable prompts get wonky for a little while, this explosion of open source models means you can freeze which model you're using until you and your organization are ready to upgrade. Right? It gives you the ability to test, to control things, to make your software reliable and upgrade only once your internal team has had a chance to test it out. You can't do that with ChatGPT. Right? The open source models are under your control. It's a big deal. It makes IT departments happy. For marketers who work in regulated industries or secure workplaces that have been forbidden to use ChatGPT, this is now an avenue for you to approach your IT department and say, hey, this open source movement will let us have the benefits of large language models without the risks because our data is never leaving our systems. For marketers who have access to technical resources that can fine-tune these open source models, that's where you're going to see a massive benefit. These models are relatively straightforward to fine-tune. Not easy, but simple, right? Straightforward. It's now even easier to customize them to your company, to your needs, to fulfill specific tasks that your team needs to work on. If you recall from the keynote address I've given, which links up in the top of the newsletter, the more fine-tuned a model is, the shorter and less cumbersome your prompts have to be. Right? Imagine in the interface of GPT for all here, imagine a set of different task-based models based on your job, right? Here's a blogging model. It's tuned for blogging. Here's an email model for writing emails at the office. Here's a model for writing social media captions, etc. Those tuned models will perform better at their specific tasks because that's what they were meant to do. And from marketers who are late to the game with large language models, this is unfortunately going to muddy the waters because each model itself is different, including what prompts do and don't work with them. Vicuna or LLaMa or Alpaca, they can operate as powerfully as ChatGPT's turbo model, but they have a different prompt structure. Right? So you'll want to pick a platform and learn it before hopping from platform to platform. My recommendation, if you're just getting started now, would be start with ChatGPT, assuming that you're allowed to do so for a few months, and then move to something like the GPT for all software with the snoozy 13B model. It's very, very capable. If you work in a regulated industry or there are privacy concerns, just go straight to GPT for all. Now, that's marketing. Let's talk about the big picture because it is worth a discussion. The LLaMa model and its derivatives is an incredibly powerful model on par with the GPT models from OpenAI. There are versions that have no restrictions of any kind on them. Versions where you can ask nearly any kind of question, get a coherent answer, even if that answer is horrifying, right? If you've used OpenAI software, if you've used ChatGPT, you have probably run into questions that it won't answer. It says, I'm sorry, I can't do that, blah, 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 right? These models and the software in general are inherently amoral, no morals, nothing, no good, no bad. It's just a tool. And thus, how that tool is used depends on who's using the tool. It's like a chainsaw. A chainsaw isn't good or bad. A chainsaw is a chainsaw. It's who's using it. You know, if it's Jason from the Halloween movies and stuff, then for Jason was Friday the 13th. Yeah. If he's using the chainsaw, it's going to have a different outcome than somebody who's an actual lumberjack. Here's an example of a question I asked, redacted, about making something you really shouldn't make at home. Right? OpenAI will tell you in ChatGPT, absolutely not, under no circumstances will it answer this question. An unrestricted model gives you an answer, though it's just as likely to be incorrect as ChatGPT, by the way. There will be misuses of these open source models, just as there are people who use open source software like Apache to run websites that are filled with hate speech and bigotry. These tools will enable content creation of all kinds, good and bad, and we need to be prepared for what that looks like. Here in the USA, next year is a presidential election year, and I have absolutely no doubt that hostile parties like Russia will attempt to interfere into our elections again, and use tools like this to create massive amounts of disinformation, manipulating easily persuaded people. But that would have happened anyway. That would have happened anyway. A hostile nation state like Russia has the resources to build custom models from scratch, specifically designed to, interfere with elections. These models, the open source models, just make the process faster for everyone, good and bad alike. And these models, particularly the unrestricted ones, do enable greater positive uses as well. There's some content that, ChatGPT flat out will not create, even though that content might have legitimate value, artistic value, for example. Things like explicit literature or controversial writing about sensitive topics. I have asked it questions. I asked this one question about politics, a political question, and it said, "I'm sorry, as a whatever model, I can't answer that question because it's a topic that's controversial and so on." I'm like, it was a question about political philosophies, and the software just said no. I feel like I should have been able to get an answer for that. Now, do people who want to use software like this or write about specific topics that are maybe controversial, do they have the right to do so? Yes. Can they with the current closed source ecosystems like OpenAI? No. So these models will enable that well. They will help encourage more uses, good and bad. What we should expect to see, what we're already seeing, is a massive explosion in the use of large language models. We should expect to see these models showing up everywhere, embedded in software we use all the time, now made free and more accessible. I believe that overall, this will be a net positive, even though the open source models do come with significant downsides. You can't hand wave them away. There are downsides, like the internet itself, like the smartphone, like the personal computer, like social media. This new generation of AI models, it amplifies humanity. What's good about us becomes better. What's bad about us becomes worse. No matter what, though, the reality is large language models are very definitely here to stay. A company like OpenAI, it could go out of business, and your ability to use ChatGPT would vanish like that. Now that the open source software exists that's rich and robust and capable, all these big tech companies could vanish tomorrow, but the technology is now in everyone's hands. It's here to stay. Finally, this has one other major effect we should talk about. Open source software is nearly impossible to regulate because in many cases there is no central entity in charge of it that has the power to turn it off. Again, OpenAI could just turn off ChatGPT tomorrow. The Apache Foundation, they have zero ability to turn off anyone who's using their software on a web server. Mozilla can't turn off the Mozilla browser. The Linux Foundation has no control over the millions of servers and desktops running the Linux OS. That means that any legislation, any governmental regulation of large language models will need to focus on the effects, on the outputs, on what people do with the tools, because it is no longer possible to regulate the tools themselves. Right? It's like chainsaws. They're out there. They exist. You can't stop them. So you have to regulate what people do with them. And it is highly likely that legislators and elected officials and government officials do not understand this at all. And they will need to very, very soon. The tidal wave of generative AI has picked up pace. We can either surf in it or drown in it. But either way, there's no stopping it. All right, let's talk about what's happening elsewhere in the world. Google Analytics. Universal Analytics turns off in like 56 days. So if you have not switched over to Google Analytics 4, there's a link for the course if you want to do it yourself. Just hit reply if you want some help with it. That's what my company does. This week I had a piece on the WGA strike, the Writers Guild of America strike, and one of their petition points about artificial intelligence that I thought they probably should have thought through a bit more. Watch the video for that to see the things I think they should have done instead. Also did a great live stream this week on B2B influencer marketing measurement, so go check that out. Let's see, job openings. What do we got here? We have digital analyst and data product manager at South Watts, junior digital analyst at Camping World, Python developer at Torchbox, senior data scientist at Apex Solutions, senior digital analyst at Save the Children, senior platform engineer at Harnum, senior Python developer at Torchbox, senior web analyst at Torchbox, my goodness. Web optimization analyst at Payoneer. So lots of good hiring going on there. In other news, we have Twitter abruptly stops reporting on government requests for data as the data reveals that Elon obeys government demands way more often than the old Twitter did. So, yeah, that dumpster fire continues to burn. Otherwise, the rest of the news is mostly, unsurprisingly, all about AI. There were a couple of interesting things. Chegg, which is a company that makes like homework help stuff, has their stock prices dived by 49% because kids are using ChatGPT now for homework help instead of their software. So some second order effects happening there. Upcoming events, B2B Ignite in Chicago at the end of this month. See you there if you're going to be at that. Maycon in Cleveland in July, ISBM in Chicago in September, Content Marketing World in September, Marketing Profs B2B Forum here in Boston in October. Unsurprisingly, going to be talking about AI at all of those. So that is the news for this week. There's a lot of it. There's a lot to think about. Thank you for sitting through it. Thank you for listening. And I look forward to hearing what your takes are. Feel free to leave a comment and wherever it is you're watching this or reading this. And I'll see you next time. If you like this video, go ahead and hit that subscribe button.